Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome virtually to St. Mary's College here in Notre Dame, Indiana. My name is Arlene Montevecchio, and I'm the director of the Center for Spirituality here at the college, which was founded in 1984 with generous support from the Sisters of the Holy Cross. I'm delighted to welcome you tonight to this final lecture in our Spring Endowed series featuring Cory Mitchell. Though we gather virtually, we wish to acknowledge and honor the Native people and their traditional homelands on which we stand. We particularly recognize the Pokagon Band of Potawatomi and the Miami, who have been utilizing this land and its resources for many years and continue to do so today. With deep gratitude, we acknowledge the Native people and their culture within our community, as well as acknowledging the land upon which we gather, pray, learn, and work. Tonight's format will include a lecture by our distinguished guest, followed by 15 or so minutes of question and answer time, facilitated by Emily Sipos Butler, the Associate Director of the Center for Spirituality. We will open the chat box shortly after our guest begins speaking, and you are free to message us privately your questions. It is now my distinct privilege to introduce our speaker. Cory D. Mitchell, Doctorate of Bioethics, is the Director of Mission Integration for Mercy Health Muskegon. He earned a graduate degree in healthcare mission leadership, as well as a doctorate in bioethics and healthcare policy at the Loyola University of Chicago Neiswanger Institute for Bioethics and Health Policy. Having served in the U.S. Navy as a research intern at Johns Hopkins University's Bloomberg School of Public Health, and as a program specialist intern at the National Institutes of Health Institute on Aging, Cory has significant experience working with vulnerable populations, including veterans and persons who are homeless. As an African-American Catholic, his research interests are Catholic healthcare, health disparities, and theological ethics. As a husband and father, Cory is currently seeking to extend his vocational service by entering into the initial formation phase of the Secular Franciscans, even though, as he writes, brown isn't his best color. Dr. Mitchell, welcome to St. Mary's College.
Well, thank you, Arlene. Oh, can you hear me? Yeah, thank you, Arlene. All right, so, oh my goodness, thank you all for joining us tonight. I hope our dialogue will be fruitful. I'll try to pace it just right, but before we get started, I heard the thanks, the words of gratitude for our Native populations, but today I'd also like to give a shout out to all you women out there this Women's History Month, and to acknowledge your feminine genius. As I was telling the ladies before we got on the call here, I have had many male role models in my life, but it was the women, often very strong women in my life, that have taught me how to be a real man. So again, thank you for the feminine genius. All right, so I'm going to see if I can share my slides with you all, and we can get this started. All right. Okay, I hope you all can see my slide, and let me move my my things around. So again, I'm Cory Mitchell. The title of this presentation is I Am Operationalizing Dignity to Address Disparities in Well-Being. I am currently the Director for Mission Integration at Mercy Health Muskegon, which is a member of Trinity Health, a national healthcare organization. And I've got no conflicts of interest to report. And my views, although data-driven, evidence-based, are my own. All right, so right off the bat, you know, I'm guessing that many of you are come from religious backgrounds. Some of you may come from different religious backgrounds. Some of you may come from no religious backgrounds. And so when we start talking about words like dignity, when we start throwing those words around, it's a loaded term, right? Because dignity for a Catholic like myself means that there's that divine spark in us because we're made in the image of God, right? In the image and likeness of God. Imago Dei, we like to say. But when you're dealing in Catholic healthcare, when you're working in Catholic healthcare, you have to. It's a very pluralistic setting, and so there is a teleological understanding of human dignity, which has to do with like being sacred. But then there's the deontological um, understanding of dignity, which is duty based, human rights based, rights based sort of thinking about, we have a right to respect. We have certain rights that are inalienable. We may have gun rights, and so you have a rights based approach to dignity. And then others, we just say, um, we may not know what that term is really. So, for all those reasons, dignity as a term is a squishy concept when you start to try to operationalize it in a healthcare setting. So, and I'd like to just kind of point out that because dignity is squishy, I think it's often helpful to think of dignity as an experience. We may not be able to pinpoint exactly what dignity means for everybody, but we do innately, intuitively understand when we experience it. And there's multiple ways to experience dignity. So we can experience dignity biologically, and I'm assuming that everyone on this call is an adult. So, when we talk about biologically, we can talk about healing. So the alleviation of pain may be something that brings us closer to the divine, right? To make us experience our dignity. It can lift us up, lift our spirits up. It can touch that very divine part of us, but also realistically and candidly, our sexuality. Sex is a way of encountering the divine. Of course, as a good Catholic, I'm going to say, that's in the context of a healthy marital relationship, but it is something where we when we give ourselves that self donation to another person, right? That's a very special thing, and so it makes us think about what we're doing when we're giving and receiving in that very special way. Sociologically or socially, when we encounter friends, family members, you know, many of us learn how to love by the example of our parents or those our grandparents or other folks, our siblings, um, friends, and all that. And then we also learn that in relationships like marriage. Once again, psychologically, the idea that our psyche is is um, is a tool for how we integrate the divine into our being. Right? When we talk about incarnational, part of that incarnation that happens to each and every one of us has to do with our psychological functioning, our self understanding, our personalities, even. And so oftentimes, because of our upbringing, because just about everybody has experienced some sort of trauma, we have gaps in our personalities, wounds, if you will. And so that fragmentation that we all bear, that woundedness that we all bear, can sometimes, when we find a way that heals us, usually that's through love and acceptance of ourselves and others. When we come into that wholeness, that psychological wholeness, our whole being is transformed, transfigured. All right. So physically, our physical surroundings, of course, that's our tactile senses and all that, but also our physical surroundings, um, things in our environment, pictures, art, buildings. When you go into a cathedral in Europe, right, and they're just huge, and the beautiful stained glass windows. I'm thinking of, what is it, Chartres in France? You see these, and the beauty, the awe, the mystery just draws you to God. But also the trees, the redwood forest, the Grand Canyon, all these things give us a sense of the divine, and they draw us in, and they beckon to us to experience God. Visual, same thing, the visual, and then auditory. Music can really lift the soul. In my former life, I was a classical musician, a bassoonist at Vanderbilt University Blair School of Music. So that musical experience is really real for me, and there's a reason why in many religious liturgies we have music as a critical part of those liturgies. And then, of course, the spiritual, that ability to find wholeness. Spirituality is really about integrating our personality with the rest of us, right? Our psychology, our beingness. So and it we're embodied as well. So it's a mind, body, spirit relationship. So all those things, right, are interconnected, although they're listed separately here. They are multidirectional and mutually reinforcing. And the more of these that we can tap into in any given encounter, the more we come in contact with the divine, right? The more we sense the divine in ourselves and in others, and really in all creation. Because as a good Franciscan, we believe that God is in all things, right? Kind of, the Jesuits say that too, but we really, when we say it, we're talking about, you know, the whole creation speaks with one voice. One voice. We're all in this together. God, we and God transcend and include everything. So, and then of course, the reality, the sad reality, is that people of color, especially Black people, experience assaults on their dignity almost in every dimension we mentioned in daily life. I mean, just about every day, there's no escaping these assaults to your dignity. Even if you don't step outside your house, just watch TV, and there's memes about Black people, or be on social media, or any Black people being dogs, and you look at some of the memes that sort of pick up on that and transmit that, and it can be really subtle, but it is there. So, all right, I was just going to say next slide, but I forgot I'm advancing the slide. So, how do we get at operationalizing dignity in the clinical encounter? Because when we think about healthcare, the first thing we think about is the clinical encounter, right? So if we're going to get at the clinical encounter and operationalize dignity there, then we've got to start talking about how we bring on clinicians and the onboarding process, right? So um, we often, I've seen HR practices, and this is across industry, not just healthcare, but um, I've seen practices where we think we're hiring for fit. So oftentimes that fit is, do they make me smile? Are they non-confrontational? Do they exude some sort of professionalism? Are they credentialed, educated? They seem like they'll work hard. Um, you know, and subconsciously, do they look like me? Do they make me feel comfortable? Um, so all those things are important, but sometimes what we don't what we don't do is really look at how clinicians would operate in diverse situations. And the neo PIR here, is that, you guys know the big five, the neurotic, extroverted openness scale, right? The neo big five. This is a retooling of that assessment that includes the extroversion and openness components of the original neo. But this particular tool is useful for looking at compassion, because the openness aspect of the openness subscale of that instrument, has is directly related to diversity, warmth, and kindness. Openness to diversity, warmth, and kindness. And that's a good measure when we're bringing in candidates, to look at that, because you can have the best clinical skills in the world, but if you're not warm and kind to every single man, woman, and child, then the clinical encounter is going to be impacted negatively. And so, and a lot of times, although you may not have this tool available or not have want to spend the money or any of that or put people through, that assessment mechanism, but when you interview people coming into healthcare, the interview panels that I've seen often lack diversity. And just as an example, I was on an interview panel interviewing some of our chaplains, and I noticed things about some candidates that nobody else picked up on because I was only African American on the panel, and I said, okay, yeah, but this is what I'm experiencing, and so it's really important that your panel be as diverse as possible because different people will pick up on different things. And if you're all kind of in group think, right, there's no way you're going to pick up on subtle cues or terms or things like that you may be red flags and come to bite you later on. So, and I am in no way suggesting that Black people have cornered the market on on identifying bad fit or bad behavior, any of that. We're all capable of identifying that, but we're also all capable of unconscious bias, every single one of us. And just as a sort of example here, proof of concept, it's interesting. If you guys read Matthew 15:22 through 18, this is the encounter Jesus has with the Canaanite woman. In this encounter, he basically implies that she's a dog and it wasn't right to give the children scraps to the dogs. And she says, but even the dogs eat the scraps that fall from the master's table. So in this encounter, in every single encounter Jesus has with what we would call a foreigner, a Samaritan, a Canaanite, the Gentile, the centurion, the guard. So when he encounters these folks, he's always shocked. If you look at the verbiage that's used, it's got exclamation marks, all over when Jesus responds, because he is shocked that people outside of the Hebrew tradition, the Jewish faith, have such great faith. He's always surprised by that, and every encounter changes him in the process. So we see, because Jesus was not born and knew everything and then began his ministry. No, Jesus had to learn and grow just like everybody else. So even Jesus had blinders on, because we see him progress and change and morph over time to where he's getting to the point where, he's asking Peter, who do you think I am? And we often kind of gloss over that, but I always think of that passage as Jesus in a type of self-discovery and trying to figure out who he is in relation to God and everyone else as well. He's figuring himself out too, right? And we don't see this come full scale until resurrection, when he tells the disciples to go out and preach the good news that you're all loved and you're all accepted to the entire world. So his worldview broadens and broadens and broadens. And that is also the experience we see with the Israelites, the Hebrew people, over time too. Their world, their sphere gets broader and broader. They start as a little caravan, Abraham and all that, and they build, they become a nation, and they keep growing, right? So this is the experience we all have, right? But we have to do the active work, just like Jesus did, to uncover those biases. So this is also in keeping with training for cultural competency. All our clinicians need to be trained for that. And then we need to celebrate diversity early and often. In every new colleague, every new employees coming on board, we need to shine a light on diversity at every turn, because when we do that, we give everyone a cue as to what's important in the organization. If we don't do that, if we're silent about that, then we begin to think that the organization functions just like the rest of the world. And if you're in a faith-based organization, you certainly don't want to do that. We ought to be countercultural. So and I can ramble on these things, but so managing dignity in the experience in patient care. This is another part of operationalizing dignity in the clinical encounter, right? So one of the things we know, and one of the things I'm doing at my hospital, is that we're looking at patient satisfaction data by race and gender. And you will be amazed when you show clinical leaders. I mean, because we can all intuit things, right? And and a lot of times we all like to think we're doing a good job, and we think we got a mission statement, we got a mission, we got a Catholic mission, or a Protestant mission, Baptist mission, or a Lutheran mission, or whatever, and we pat ourselves on the back because we got this beautiful mission. We're all living our mission and values. But when you look at your patient satisfaction data and you see, it doesn't even have to be statistical variation where it's significant. So, and I'm talking about, significant at the 0.05 level with an alpha of 0.05. But if you've got meaningful variation where there's, in terms of demographics, there's a lot of work that you need to do to get at that. So one of the things you need to do is put that data in front of clinicians and basically show them that no, we're actually not doing a good job for certain populations. And then start to put together action plans for addressing those. And just by looking at that data on a regular basis, clinicians will start to change. Clinicians will start to pay more attention and have better patient encounters with diverse people because they know that's what you're looking at. And at some point, on your safety huddles or whatever, you're called to report out on those and what you're doing to address those. So then we can look at designing financial incentives around that as well, right? Because if people are incentivized to provide better care to all people, they tend to do that. I mean, people respond to the incentives you put before them. And then with regard to spiritual care, because this is my domain, right? Chaplains. My personal experience has been that, when my sister was dying, we were offered chaplain services, and the chaplain that came to our room um, was not equipped to deal with my family, was not a good fit for my family. And never once did he ask on his own, could he contact one of, our pastor in the community. Um, that was hubris on his part to assume that he could meet our spiritual needs and not ask us if we'd like to a referral, basically. And so I had to pull him aside and ask, could you contact our pastor, and here's his name, and all that. Um, and so it's we need to be very we need to approach pastoral care with a sense, or spiritual care with a sense of humility when we're doing that, because we've all got our own blinders, right? So now we get to the part of how we operationalize that dignity in the clinical encounter, but from a mission and organizational development perspective. So for you guys that may not know what a mission leader is or mission leader does, we hold the Catholic or faith-based institution accountable to being what it thinks and says it is. So we hold the institution's feet to the fire, if you will. And so for me in my ministry, I like to focus on compassion because I recognize not everyone's Catholic, not everyone's Christian. And so compassion cuts across all that. We can all agree that we all want compassionate care, and that patients respond to compassionate care. And the Dalai Lama says, my religion is compassion. And if we can all just get on board with that, we have a much better world. So, and then in this celebrating a culture of compassion, we've got to create and celebrate. So, and that's an iterative process, right? It's never done. It's kind of like continuous improvement. You gotta talk about it, repeat it, reframe it, and talk about it some more, and celebrate it, celebrate it, celebrate it. And then in terms of how we engage in problem solving, I'm still learning. I'm relatively new to my role, and a lot of times I come with a lot of answers, and And I always have to remind myself to empower the staff, the colleagues, to be active agents in their own salvation, or active problem solvings for their own solvers for their own problems. And that's going to increase resiliency in the organization and decrease burnout. So when we do that, the byproduct of that is we actually increase teamwork, collaboration, and camaraderie. And when we do that again, we want to stress, honor, and celebrate our mission, whether that's a faith-based mission or whether it's for-profit organization. However your mission is laid out, you need to stress, honor, and celebrate that. And it doesn't matter if you're a hospital or a tech company. That's what you do. So how do we know um, what we should be aiming at? Plane Tree is an organization that's focused on patient-centered care. They went out and asked patients, "What do you want? What do you want?" And patients responded by saying, "We want information, choices, and open communication. We want care coordination because we don't like running around from here and there and repeating our stories over and over again. And we want a physical, now this is important, a physical environment that eases. We want a physical environment that eases." So remember, I said aesthetics, really important, really important. And we want whole person care. We want mind, body, and spirit. We want compassion, whole person care. So remember those things, especially we'll get into this physical environment. So and what's interesting about this is this cuts across all demographics, right? So and keep that in mind because we're going to get into this a little bit more. So here, not to pick on Chicago, but this is where I got my education. This is a racial map of Chicago, and the green is black neighborhoods, the red is Asian neighborhoods, orange Hispanic neighborhoods. Now, again, not to pick on Chicago, because if I did this with South Bend, it would look the same way. If I did this with Muskegon, Grand Rapids, Detroit, doesn't matter. Any metropolitan area is going to look similar to this. So, um, and this is not my work, by the way. This is Meshner work. So, but I think it's important for us to think about what our communities look like if we were to do a racial dot map like this, and see these neighborhoods are pretty segregated. And you don't have to have a lot of imagination to guess that if you drove your car through those green neighborhoods, which are black neighborhoods, or those orange neighborhoods, which are Hispanic neighborhoods, they would not look like those blue neighborhoods. All right. So if we were to go to those neighborhoods, even without having been there, you know a ghetto when you go through it. No one's got to tell you what it is. You know it when you experience it. You want to lock your doors. You want to roll up your windows. You don't want to stop at too many red lights. Um, and your body knows, your parasympathetic nervous system is on overdrive, right? So that experience is really the precursor to PTSD. That 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 systematic overactivation, that parasympathetic system overactivation, is what, if it's done over time for long periods of time, it's called allostatic load, and basically it causes premature aging, which causes excess morbidity and mortality. So it is premature aging happening. You feel that way when you drive through that neighborhood, and you think about somebody that's got to live in that neighborhood for their whole lives, who are trapped in those neighborhoods. Those people are experiencing that same symptomology, right? They're experiencing that on a daily basis. It's like living in a war zone, and it denies human dignity. This is a big problem when we start talking about the morality of this. It is an affront to human dignity when we have people living in subhuman conditions. So this leads us to an issue that I call dignity before the door, DBD. All right. So we have these great mission statements in our hospitals And again, we like to think, we think about our legacies and our histories and how great we've served the community and all that. But I tell you what, if your community looks like some of these communities that we know, we know what they look like, we know where they are, we can probably name them. When we have those outside our doors, when people come into the hospital, they're not leaving all that behind. That's coming in with them. They have been denied dignity on a daily basis just outside your doors. And if you've got these beautiful mission statements talking about your compassion and how much you reverence them and all this kind of stuff, those things ring hollow and inauthentic to people who are experiencing daily denial of dignity in a catchment area that belongs to the hospital. And so when we start thinking about why don't people want to get vaccinated in our communities? Well, one, we've got a historic issue with the legacy and even the ongoing issues of what Harriet Washington calls medical apartheid, right? Experimentation on Black bodies. So you've got that issue, and then on top of it, you've got systems that don't show me that they actually care about my well-being unless they're getting reimbursed for my coming through the four doors or the four walls. So those are big issues, and you can't get at population health if you don't attend to those issues. So when we think about approaches to getting at that, then one of the ways I always say the things we should be doing is, one, every hospital should be geocoding its health outcomes to the greatest extent possible. And even if it's just one measure, blood pressure, pick blood pressure because it's easy to measure it. You don't have to stick anybody. It doesn't hurt. You can get the measures pretty easily. It's inexpensive. Do blood pressure. Look at your geocode your payer mix, because if you have a high concentration of Medicaid reimbursement, that suggests that you've got a lot of people out of work. So that means that that's one area you could be doing some community work around social determinants of health, is getting people to work. Secondly, a hospital with a poor payer mix where a lot of its population is on Medicaid is not sustainable over the long run. So I would give you 5, 10 years and you'll be shutting your doors, and then it'll become a public scandal. And you've got to explain why you're about to close your inner city hospital and move to the suburbs and build a brand new multi-million dollar campus that's beautiful and never been seen before and all that, and you left the people in the inner city in the lurch. Happens all the time. Um, so we once we get those kind of data points, to look at where dignity is being denied in our neighborhoods, we need to verify that with our community needs assessment data. And although I didn't put it on here, more importantly, we need to look at how we roll out our community health implementation plan. Every hospital has to do a community health needs assessment every 3 years. That's the law. So when those health needs assessments are done, they also require a community health implementation plan, or CHIP. And so we need to be really strategic about how we approach our CHIP, and we'll get into that in a second. How am I doing on time? Okay. So um, there's a strategic approach to getting at that dignity before the door issue. So once we've geocoded our neighborhoods, we can start collaborating with our neighborhoods, right? Collaborating with the stakeholders in those neighborhoods. So one of the things we can do, we can take community, or the purpose-built communities model is a great one, I think. Purpose-built communities is an organization in East Lake, Atlanta, who pioneered this approach with its East Lake intervention. I don't know if any of you play golf, but East Lake was a um, high crime, low employment, low education, poor health, poor education. It was just an awful community. It ranked one of the highest in crimes in the country. Um, Now it is known as a place where PGA tournaments go to play golf. Uh, NCAA tournaments are held as well, and that money that goes to those big major events goes back into the East Lake community. So the purpose-built community model says the first thing you do is find in the community what they call a community quarterback, a nonprofit, it could be a for-profit, but an organization that takes responsibility for community development efforts in that community. And all it takes is a short grant. And once you submit that grant to purpose-built communities, and anybody can write it. You submit it, and purpose-built communities will say, okay, we're going to take this project on. They come out to the community, and they will help you with your design charrettes, and all that. And they start to engage the community in redevelopment efforts. And what they did with Eastlake, and what the model is about is creating mixed income neighborhoods. So we don't concentrated poverty is really the root cause of healthcare disparities. Concentrated poverty. So if you create neighborhoods that are mixed income, you don't have concentrated poverty, because you have income for all, or housing for all levels, right? So you want some affordable housing, you want some more moderately priced housing, you want some higher priced housing, and that provides the social capital a community needs. But you also want to be mindful of gentrification. So what HUD suggests is when you start to build these communities, you add 30% more to what your affordable housing needs are currently. And I would suggest that, and that's a bit dated, I would suggest that you probably safer with 50, 60% more, if that's possible, if you can get a developer to sign on to that. But the other thing is, when we look at houses, communities, unfortunate aspect of community development is that when people think about Black neighborhoods or Hispanic neighborhoods, because minorities or people of color are often looked at as less than, or we don't warrant the same kind of planning and forethought that whites warrant. So when you look at Black communities, especially, they're all housing. They're all housing. So the concept of an ecosystem, an ecosystem that allows people to thrive, not just warehouses people, um, is missing. So what we get when we look at Black neighborhoods are basically individualized prison cells, right? We call them houses, but they're really individualized prison cells because there's nothing in the community to support people living there. So it's just a matter of, it's just a place to rest your head, or what they say in jail, three hots and a cot. So it is really important that we look at mixed use neighborhoods. So I give you an example. Muskegon Heights, where I work and minister, there's no grocery store. There is not one grocery store, and there are only 10, about 10, I think less than 10 now, Black owned grocery stores in the whole country. But we are 50% less likely to have grocery stores in our community. All right. So they have to be mixed use. They have to provide ecosystems where people can live and thrive. You want to be able to live, work, and you want office space and retail space and walkability, and you want it to be aesthetically pleasing. You can't just have a sidewalk and then say, we want people to get more physically active. You got to give people something to walk to, not just through. You got to give them something to walk through. You got to make people want to live in the neighborhoods that, you know, if you wouldn't want to live in that neighborhood, nobody would. And that's the way I look at it. So the East Lake community was also a pioneer to the cradle to college experience. So in East Lake, you can go from childcare to college degree and never leave that community. So, and I think that's a beautiful model. And then one of the things I encourage health systems to do, if there are any of you healthcare leaders on the call, is to reach out with a local community development financial institution, a CDFI, particularly if they have a, a part of their mission that focuses on excluded entrepreneurs. This is a growing industry. Whether we're talking about CDFIs or whether we're talking about venture capitalist firms, the need for startups and to support those businesses, small businesses affected by COVID, is so critical. And that's critical to not just people getting work, but that's critical to the health, their mental health, their physical health. All that work is very core to our ontology, right? Our being as humans. So it's critical. We can't overlook that. So again, I told you my opinions are based in evidence. So a lot of this, the stuff that I'm spouting off here, or seem to be spouting off, a lot of this data comes from my project that I led at NIH, the Baltimore study there listed, and then a HUD run study called Moving to Opportunity, the Moving to Opportunity study, which was done I believe back in the 70s. That's when it was started. And it was a randomized clinical controlled trial. And then, of course, the East Lake proof of concept that I mentioned. So one of the things that my study did in Baltimore was looked at blood pressure and cardiovascular disease outcomes. One of the things that the MTO study did, the Moving to Opportunity study did, was look at glucose and mental health. And in all those studies, right, we saw that when the environment was better, was more aesthetically pleasing, those measures automatically change, even though there was no change in the individual level income or self-sufficiency. So just by being in a neighborhood that supports your mental health, your feeling of safety, having things in your neighborhood to support your just being able to live. Um, that's so critical. And the other things we saw, significant uh, uh, drop in unemployment rates, significant drops. And this is for the East Lake, especially the East Lake experiment, lower crime levels. Um, and by with all this, right, so this is, I want to remind you all that this is not just a matter of Black people, um because segregation and our sprawl, our living, our the way we live as Americans, our sprawl patterns, the way we live out in suburbs and get further out and all that, and the way we've got to drive to and from work, often driving to the city for work and driving back, all that contributes to global warming. So as I like to say, um, we are this is a planetary issue, and and as Pope Francis likes to remind us, and these are my words, not his, but we will have to learn how to either live together or die together. But either way, we'll be together, and it's really our choice. So um, and then again, looking at outcomes, one of the shortcomings of many studies, not including mine because I did, but some of the other studies, they didn't really do a real good job of measuring um, biomarkers like blood pressure. And I love blood pressure because it's easily measurable, it's malleable, you can change it pretty quickly, and it's sensitive to the dignity experience. So blood pressure, your blood pressure knows without you telling it, your blood pressure knows if your dignity is being denied, if you feel threatened, if you're in an unsafe relationship, if you've been traumatized, if you've not been loved. Your blood pressure knows all that kind of stuff, right? Um, and that's a great way to connect the mind, body, and spirit. So and for that reason, it's a perfect biomarker for any kind of intervention research, if any of you are so inclined. And it makes it great. You can go out there in South Bend and experiment. You can get it past your IRB, and there's a lot of data gathering you could probably do. So let me see. Here's a picture of the before and after of Eastlake. So Eastlake is our model community that Purpose Built Community did. And on the left, we see what Eastlake, part of Eastlake looked like before the intervention. And on the right, we see a community, at least this part, this facade, that helps us understand how flourishing is so important to population health. And how this is a graphic depiction of social determinants of health. If I got to go home to the picture on the left every day, my blood pressure, my cardiovascular disease outcomes, and my stress levels, which is going to affect my propensity to get cancers, to get sexually transmitted diseases, and all those other things. My immune system is going to be less effective going home every day to the house on the left versus going home to one of the houses in the right on the right. So, and I like to show off our brand new facility because we're talking about aesthetics. We are in the process of building a healing garden, which if any of you want to donate, we're about $500,000 short for building our healing garden, but we're going to have a healing garden here, and this is going to be a beautiful space for the people of Muskegon. So I just like to show that off. And then I just like to really wrap it up by saying, with COVID-19, we are witnessing the world depending on healthcare now more than ever. Um, and COVID-19 shined a spotlight on a broken healthcare system. So we've got to do better. And again, what do patients want? They want information, choices, open communication, care coordination, a physical environment that eases, not just in the hospital, but dignity before the door. Remember that. And then they want whole person care, whole person care. So they want us to care for mind, body, and spirit. So with that, I will shut up and let you guys ask questions.
I want to thank you very much, Dr. Mitchell, for your excellent presentation. I think it gave us a lot to think about, and I appreciated the concrete examples that you gave. We have several questions already in the chat relating to that, so we'll try to get to as many questions as we can. We'll see what we can do here. I think we'll go ahead and start with a question that relates to what you were just talking about, I think. What helps or stimulates a neighborhood to initiate change of itself? Or does this change only grow in developing new intentional communities? And I might add, how do you see the role of the hospital or healthcare facility in that development?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Thank you for that. I think one, you know, organizations just like people, we have our vices. So for healthcare institutions, we often have a go it alone sort of mindset. We think that because we're the largest game in town, we've got to do everything. We don't really collaborate real well. That's something we've got to unlearn. And so it takes humility on our part, and I like the word interdependence, because what all health systems have to recognize is they are not separate and apart from those communities that are surrounding them. We are interdependent, and we are talking about ecosystems. Health systems are part of ecosystems. So oftentimes disadvantaged communities have been disadvantaged and beaten down for so long. They don't know what they need so much, that they don't know what they need. But if you ask them, I mean, they're not articulating, because if you're busy trying to figure out how you're going to pay your bills, how you're going to eat, how you're going to take care of your kids, how you're going to get, can you afford childcare, all the things that people are worried about. The last thing that comes to mind is we need to redevelop the community, at least in my experience. So what we've got to do is we've got to get community stakeholders that have the bandwidth in those communities to start to act as catalysts. Faith-based organizations, educational institutions are great catalyst partners in that dialogue, right? Because we can convene the community, we can get the community, and the first thing you got to do is just to start showing interest in the community. This is the one thing we really don't do well. We are only interested when you're a dollar in the door. It's very utilitarian. So we've got to be able to say people are important because they're people. The environment is important because it supports people. We are all in this together. The biosphere needs us to wake up. So my thing is we've got to reach out to others. we've got to be humble, and we've got to have a sense of humility when we do it. But there are players in those communities, and there are thought leaders, influencers in those communities, young people, schools. I'm reaching out to superintendents, and they've got young people who are chomping at the bit to get things rolling. So there's a lot of pent up energy. People want change. So you'll find them if you look for them.
Yeah, it's really kind of on the rest of us to go out from where we are in our comfort zone and look for those partners. Yeah, it sounds like. Um, so I got several more questions here. They're quite interesting. How might we further create space for reflection and analysis on the intersectionality of trauma, theology, and healing?
That sounds like a Therese
It's a
Lysol
light,
question.
it's a light question.
Yeah. So that's a great question. I think um, it is really one of the things I do. Um, COVID has kind of made us rethink a lot of different things, right? So there are, generational differences in the way we approach media. So I often hear older generations saying we got to get back to in person this, and we've got to get back to in person that. And then I see young people who grow up, who have been looking at screens, for pretty much all their lives, and they're more comfortable with screen time than say people my age and up. And so I think the nice thing I've been doing, experimenting with media, is so much of dealing with trauma and having that reflective sacred space to unpack that. um, I think liturgy, I do a virtual liturgy every Wednesday. We call it Wednesdays at the Well. And so I love Yo-Yo Ma. Yo-Yo Ma opens us up to a different kind of pace and space, and kind of allows us to kind of breathe. And so as we're listening to music, it opens us up to a universe. But then we also, and I said the word, I gave it away. So we also have to remind people to breathe. That simple thing is so important in a pace where it's nonstop. So just being able to stop and breathe and be silent is so critical in trauma informed reflection. And so I like to do that and ground us in that. Now everybody doesn't have that opportunity, but I encourage everybody, for the well-being of their colleagues, their employees, to start creating virtual spaces and places that where you can have that respect, um, that reflective place. But then I now just throw out a plug for, we're also experimenting with a program developed by Ohio State University called Mindfulness in Motion. It is an 8-week mindfulness program. We're just piloting it. I don't know where it's going to go, but we're really excited. Just started today. Unfortunately, I had to take a call, so I missed my first session, but it is designed for busy people in a pandemic, healthcare workers in a pandemic. And it is evidence-based. It has been shown to decrease burnout by about 42% and increase teamwork and engagement by like 24% or something like that. So
That's impressive, and it brings up a good specific point there about care for the caretakers themselves, um, which is key in enabling them to continue to take care of the community surrounding them. So you're speaking about creating space for trauma informed reflection. We have another question about physical spaces. Someone said they were reading about trauma informed design. So are hospitals designing their interiors to offer comfort to those who are coming in who are traumatized and in pain, etc.? Can
yeah.
you speak to that at all, the physical space?
Yeah. So some hospitals do that better than others. Um, our space at our hospital is beautiful, but I can tell you that I used to work with the VA, and our old center was not designed for um, person-centered care. But we got a new facility that Plain Tree, the same organization that I presented here, that they helped us in the design. So it was very human centered, very people patient centered in its design, and it is beautiful. Veterans go there just to hang out, um, and a lot of them with PTSD, so they'll hang out, they'll eat lunch, they'll just sit in the space, they'll congregate, they'll talk. Of course, this was pre-COVID, but it's a great space, and when you have that, it's amazing what kind of community work you can do when people just enjoy coming and sitting in your facility, not to be, not to go for a medical visit or anything, but just to come and be. That's a beautiful thing.
It reminds me of what you were saying in your presentation when you showed those pictures of the East Lake community before and after development. I can imagine it's just much nicer to be in that area after development, and people can kind of breathe more and creates more of that space for them, as you were talking about. So it's nice when the hospital can do the same in its physical facility. So we'll take a different turn with this question here. He says, I'm so glad to hear about dignity in a way that's different than the very narrow way it's talked about in bioethics and ethics consultation. How would you translate all of this into an ethics consultation?
That's great. I love that. So I think I'll give you an example, real simple, but I had a ethics consult with a woman who um, who was uh, who was losing her brother, and she had had run-ins with some of our medical staff. She wanted one thing. They were not willing to budge. She felt like they were being racist. So they called me in. So I go meet with her, but recognizing again that dignity is an experience. We go back from the squishy concept, but saying dignity is an experience. Um, Normally when we go through ethics consults, we want to set them down in the one of the rooms off to the in the lobby or in the waiting area, and the consult rooms, they're really small and cramped and all that kind of stuff. Or we have an ethics consult right in the lobby or somewhere inconvenient where everybody can hear our discussion. So what I did, recognizing that she felt her dignity had been denied. So I wanted to repair that damage. So what do? I take her to the brother's room. I take her to the brother's room and I ask her, as we're looking, and I just said, let's just, meet with him and see how he's doing. So we did that. And I asked if you would like us to pray for your brother. Can we, and and she was really moved by that. And so at that moment, something in her soul was stirred because the tears began to flow. Um, Her dignity, I believe, she felt that dignity being affirmed. And then from that openness, now having encountered the divine in her brother, in the spirit, in the prayer, having encountered that, we could go back and have this ethics consult, and it was a totally different experience then. So it wasn't us versus them.
That's a great story. I think that illustrates what you're talking about quite well. And maybe we have time for one more question here. So given that we are still living in the midst of COVID-19 pandemic, it's not quite over yet, and it's been, I think many of us have seen in the news, reports of racial disparities vis-a-vis COVID-19, whether it's people seeking vaccinations or access to vaccinations or other ways. Could you speak a little bit about COVID-19 and how economic and racial disparities in healthcare have been exacerbated or come to light more during this pandemic, and how you might see that, a call to address them?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. I don't know that COVID has exacerbated anything. Those disparities were already there. What we're seeing is that again, we're populations living in poverty, concentrated poverty, because of the multiple chronic stressors, will have poor immune functioning than your non impoverished populations, right? And so what they become is this petri dish to spread. In fact, we know from biophysics, there's a sociologist by the name of I believe it's either Steve or Mark Granovetter. So he's at Stanford, or was at Stanford, and he used a biophysics model to show how um, disease isolates diseases spread, novel diseases spread from social isolates. And one of the reasons they spread from social isolates is because the lower immune functioning, and all those sorts of things. So we see this same dynamic play out, whether you're talking about breast cancer, whether you're talking about HIV/AIDS, whether you're talking about STDs, any kind of, or STIs, whether you're talking about any kind of immune functioning, and we even see it with blood pressure. There's a study that showed that teenagers, when they went to school, when Black teenagers, when they went to school, their blood pressure, and I would be willing to bet their immune system also improved when they got to school. When they got back home, when they got near to their neighborhoods, their blood pressures would spike, the stress response would take over. And so, but we saw the opposite phenomenon with white kids. So as they went to school, their blood pressures would spike, and when it came back home, they would. So these things really have an effect, and I think for COVID, um, it is a matter of recognizing that concentrated poverty, as Dr. David Williams says, is a fundamental cause of healthcare disparities. And as long as we have these pockets of dehumanizing communities, situations, we are going to have any kind of disease outbreak is going to manifest itself just like COVID. So this ought to be a wake up call for us to say, because this isn't just a Black issue. Because if we don't treat this as an American issue, or really a global issue, those isolates are going to continue to spread diseases because they're isolates, and care is not provided across the globe, or sufficient care. So we have to. Pope Francis talks about our radical interdependence, and we really need to be mindful that we are all in this together. We are our brothers and sisters keepers.
I think I'll ask one more question to kind of take us from dehumanizing to humanizing, which you've done well, and you kind of mentioned Pope Francis. So maybe, would you like to say a few words about how the Franciscan tradition to which you are devoted has informed your approach to healthcare? What kind of words of wisdom, maybe from the Franciscan tradition, can assist those here who are connected to the healthcare field?
Well, thank you. So, I love that question. I, one of the things about Franciscans, so there's different ways of looking at Franciscans. So a lot of people will know us, we call, Francis sentimentalism, the bird bath Francis and all that kind of stuff, right? But Franciscans, we have a committee, a body of work called Justice, Peace, and Integrity of Creation. This body of work is core to our spirituality. So it's not something separate and apart, but it's this realization. Saint Francis knew how to incorporate the leper, how to go. He was basically the Good Samaritan, right? So knew how to incorporate the leper, knew how to incorporate the Sultan. Well, not necessarily incorporate, but how to build peace, how to be a bridge for peace. And how do we do that? We don't actively work on peace. We are peace. The idea is to cultivate that peace so we can be peace, and then that's how we build peace. And so for Franciscans, realizing that we are part of an intrinsic whole. John Duns Scotus and and oh my goodness, and Bonaventure, talk about this idea of God speaking with one voice, and God's center being nowhere and circumference being everywhere. This idea that the cosmic Christ, right? The creation, we talk about creation. Creation started with the Big Bang. So we get into your science classes now and play with people's minds. So the incarnation, we say, started with the Big Bang 14 billion years ago or so, give or take. So that was the incarnation, the Christ event, right? And Christ was not a plan B for a population of people who have eaten fruit and fallen off the bandwagon and needed to be redeemed that way. No, Christ was the beginning and the end, the Alpha and Omega, the first and the last thought of God to say this is the pattern for the rest of creation. Christ is we are not called to just worship Christ. We are called to follow Christ. And so we as Franciscans say, from gospel to life and life to gospel. We are not called to be just passive worshipers of a deity. We are called to follow Christ in action and also in our spirituality. So again, we do that by being peace.
Oh, I think that's just beautiful to think about, being Christ and being peace and being connected to the cosmic Christ, who is the beginning and the end. And we are caught up in that. Thank you so much for those encouraging words to end on. And thank you for your presentation. You gave us a lot to think about, brought in so many wonderful things. Thank you to all of you who joined us for our last event in our spring endowed lecture series on spirituality, ethics, and healthcare. Thank you to the Sisters of the Holy Cross who founded the center and graciously continue to support us. Thanks also to the staff at St. Mary's College Campus and Community Events, IT, and Marketing for their assistance, and to the donors who make this lecture series possible. Thank you to all of you for spending the past hour or so with us. We wish you a wonderful evening. Good night.